Welcome, everyone, to the Next Gen Call Center series, where we interview experts and get their perspectives, best practices, and insights when it comes to implementing AI in your call center. Today, we're super privileged to have Mark McKercher, CEO of CX by Us. Previously, he was the global head of customer care, payments, and commerce at Roku. He's also held positions at Amazon as well as Google. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chad. Great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, first time, people that are tuning in for the first time and want to get a better idea about who you are and your experience, why don't you kind of walk us through your experience in the CX space?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chad. My experience goes way back to just getting out of college. I sort of, I think this is true for a lot of people, but I sort of fell into this space. It wasn't very intentional. I was really interested in communications and politics in college, and ended up in a call center on Capitol Hill, writing scripts for raising funds for political campaigns and such. And from there, pivoted into a startup who had a contact center, was doing wireless sales and services, and got this amazing opportunity. And I think it was in 2003, to move to the Philippines and scale and launch BPOs in person, as the kind of on the ground resource for the company I worked for. From there, pivoted and got an opportunity with PayPal to do something very similar, but for obviously a much bigger company and a bigger brand. Launched PayPal's North American, UK, and Australian operations, their first offshore operations in the Philippines. And then came back stateside and did that, worked a couple more years with PayPal. Spent about 3 years with Amazon doing in-house captive customer experience work, lead operations manager type stuff, and then did some program management for them. From there, went over to Google, where I had a really fun almost 5 years, helped them think about their outsourcing strategies as it related to hardware devices back in the kind of 2013 timeframe. And then worked on Google Express, which was a same day and next day shopping product. From there, did a quick stint at Samsung, spent about 5 years after that working on SaaS, software as a service, customer success, which was much more about B2B, obviously, than B2C. And then, as you alluded to, this last 3 years or so, worked at building out the customer experience for Roku's recurring revenue business, which is its payments business and its commerce business. That was a blast, had a really good time. And earlier this year, decided to kind of take a new turn, try my own little outfit. So founded CX by Us, which is really just a small little advisory and consulting service, working with a few companies right now in either seed stage or just kind of startup, and thinking about how to take AI and deploy it with great human customer support.
Awesome. So pivoting a little bit here, for companies leveraging call centers in 2024, can you share some of the dominant trends that you're currently seeing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously AI is the biggest thing that I've been to two or three conferences this year so far, and there's only been one panel event that wasn't about AI. So it's everywhere, right? It's everywhere. There's startups everywhere, thinking about how they can get into this space and add value quickly. But in order to be successful with AI, whether it's generative, whether it's conversational, whether it's sort of your traditional chatbot that does a variety of things, yeah, you've got to have really clear data governance models in place. And I say that because I've talked to quite a few brands, as well as a number of these companies in the AI space, that are struggling to get effective proof of concepts off the ground in order to show value quickly. So I think that's one thing. Another thing is I think leaders have to be really careful about over promising right now. The buzz is out, right? We can automate everything. Everything's going to be so simple. It's really it's in the C-suite, right? So the CEOs, the CFOs are saying, "Go get me savings. Go get me half back from what I spend every year on customer experience." I think that's misguided. I think it goes with kind of how the world works with excitement and so forth. It's sort of like media. But I think you've got to be careful as a practitioner not to overpromise, because I've talked to leaders who have told me they found in the first year of deploying a POC with AI that they need to maintain their current tech stack, which creates zero savings, right? And then the other piece is the whole part about labor arbitrage in the BPO industry, right? the BPO industry is coming up on 450 billion a year, which is just a massive amount of money, obviously. So there's this huge interest in figuring out how to displace and, frankly, get in and get a piece of that, I think, from the AI companies. And so practitioners like myself are going to have to be really deliberate about, do we go out and find a third party to help us figure out how to leverage AI effectively? Do we partner with our BPO partners? Because there's a lot of those, especially the big ones that are leading with AI as a differentiator. So those are some really the big key trends I'm thinking about in 2024 so far.
Yeah, absolutely. So, kind of on the topic of challenges, I know you mentioned a couple just around AI POCs.
Right.
Can you share some other like challenges that you see enterprise companies, around, CX this year kind of facing? We looked at, traditional BPOs like teleperformance, kind of getting hit on their stock quite significantly, with a lot of AI chatter. But what are some other challenges that you currently see this year?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that first question a little, and then I'll expand on it a bit. But the biggest challenge I think that leaders and customer experience are going to face is in just a really deep focus on savings at the expense of the experience, right? And I really am worried about that. That's a key area because there's a lot of folks, frankly, that are in the contact center or customer experience industry that are rightly worried about their own jobs, right? Much less all the folks that are actually taking contacts, emails, phones, chat, is SMS, right? So I think there's this super aggressive focus on savings, and what I worry most about is the experience being sort of lost in all of the excitement about it. And so a couple of things I would suggest that folks could do is, like I mentioned before, go in and be really clear about what you're trying to accomplish in launching AI, and perhaps over-index on what it's going to cost initially to get it off the ground, so that you're not expected to cut corners to impact CX, and ultimately employee experience as well. Those are a couple of the areas that I would highlight.
Yeah, that's awesome. So before we pivot to like more, heavy AI conversations, I
Yeah.
also wanted to kind of tap your experience, right? So you've worked at some of the leading companies as it pertains to call center and more broadly, CX. Can you share like any best practices or lessons that you've just learned over the years?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Going back to my really formative experience at Amazon, it's true today. It was true then. I think it'll always be true. Brands that think about, leaving a seat at the table for customers and meetings are the brands that are going to win long term. Amazon has shown that just, day in and day out through their mass scale over the last 15 years. So I think again that ties back to customer obsession. Start with the customer and work backwards. That's a key thing that I learned. I tried to help expand on that thought process and bring that thought process to other places I've been. I learned a lot at Google just about the power of information, right? Like having the amount of information, frankly, the computing power that they have is a really significant differentiator. But what they didn't necessarily have, and I think what they still struggle with a little bit, is leading with the customer, frankly. It's just a bit culturally different. A key thing I think I've learned also, and most importantly for me in the last 5 years, is while customer experience is being pivoted and targeted for automation and simplification because it makes sense and it's ultimately what the customer needs, people and focusing on people is absolutely critical. And what I mean by that is, I've hired a couple of two or three, maybe four people in the last 5 years that, investing in people and building relationships is such a critical element of being, I think, a well-rounded leader. So for me, there are two pieces of that. One, just hiring people and giving them guardrails and getting out of the way and letting them go build and execute has been the most fun thing I've ever done in my career. I got to do that at Roku. Really grateful for that. And then just in these last 3 or 4 months, I guess, investing in your own brand as well, I think is really, really important. I've learned a lot about that since leaving Roku, and focusing on what am I excited about? What can I bring to the industry that isn't necessarily attached to one of the companies I work for? So I would call that out as well.
Definitely. So kind of along the same lines of, having a perspective. So kind of pivoting towards more AI specific questions here. Obviously there's a lot of talk about how AI is going to impact call centers.
Right.
There's folks on, one side of the spectrum that are super positive. There's folks on the other side that are saying, look, all the jobs are going to be gone and AI is going to take over. So what's your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great point. I was actually just talking to a leader this morning on that very point. And she and I were discussing this, and her whole focus was, hey, how do I continue to simplify the CX so that I don't have to grow headcount in line with revenue, right? Which is frankly, for the last 30, 40 years, that's generally what brands expected to do. As I grow my business, I have to grow X headcount based on contact rates. I think that's totally changed. And so what I would say is, um, you know, I think the main piece here to your question, Chad, is we need to bring the people along on the journey. And the people is everyone. The people is the C-suite. The people is the folks at the, at the level of running the operations, all the way down to, every single person out there handling, and the hardest working people in the business actually handling the customer questions and queries. Because yes, everyone's role will change. It's always changing anyways. Like that's the only constant in life, right? I think we can agree on that. But, in this time, bringing the people along, making them a part of the discussion and the dialogue is so critical. And a couple of ways you can think about doing that is just having all hands and town halls where you talk about like the company's vision as it relates to AI, and just be honest, right? Because I think the honest thing to say right now in most cases would be, yes, a lot of the work that's being done today can be automated. But my thought process behind this is automate the simple stuff, lower your overall operating cost, and then take some of that and invest back in those people that we're talking about so that they can do the more complex things and they can do the things that AI doesn't do well, like we talked about, empathy, contextualization, at least not yet, right? It's probably going to get better, but like contextualizing what humans really feel and need and want, that's what we need people in these CX roles doing in the future. And I think it's going to provide even more opportunity for them. But the whole mantra there is just bring them along for the journey, and don't leave them out of the strategic discussion and the strategic execution.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great perspective. And I think just a good reminder for all of us, especially in tech, because I think sometimes we go down that rabbit hole of like, if we build it, they will come. And it's not necessarily always a great outcome. So exactly to your point. So I'm sure you're probably hearing this question quite a bit, as you talk to executive stakeholders and different enterprise companies, like how should enterprises be strategically positioning around these AI tailwinds? And I know you and I kind of previously talked about that. There's some enterprise companies that have a lot of legacy infrastructure, and then there are some new companies that are like digital native companies. So there is kind of a different strategy depending on, which flavor of a company you currently are.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because you're right. I think of like the telcos and the right? Your Comcast and your AT&T and T and Verizon, like those companies have been, I think, outplayed. They were some of the big companies early days when looking at chatbots and looking at automation and have done a lot of work there. But at the same time, going back to that point about data governance, they're the ones with just data everywhere, right? So it's a very complex conversation, not even to mention organizationally, like who owns what, right? Where does AI live? That's also one of the biggest things I've been hearing about in the last 3 or 4 months is like, where does this sit? Is it under the CTO? Is it under the CPO or the product leader? Does this sit within customer experience and the support organization? Like, well, where does this go? I think that's also a part of it. But when I back to the primary question, you know, I think enterprises have to be realizing that they've got to be nimble. This isn't a case where, and it's going to be very hard because humans naturally want to, here's my segment, this is what I own. And hey, I'm guilty of it. I've done it in my career. It's not like I've never done that. It's just a human instinct to own things. I think the brands that are going to do really well here, you mentioned it in your question, are probably those that are forward thinking in a growth stage that don't have a tremendous amount of legacy infrastructure, organizational kind of noise, and they're able to get really specific about how they want to deploy AI. Because I think I heard this at a conference a couple of months ago. Like AI is not, it's not going to work well when you just bring it up and you go try and search for a problem to attach it to, right? You need to have a specific problem and then bring the technology to the table. Because if you do it the other way around, then it's going to impact those things we just talked about in a very negative way. So I think these companies that are digital in nature and really coming up and coming of age right now have a huge advantage because they don't have that long-term infrastructure as it relates to technology and organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe a follow-on question to that. So for companies that do have a lot of that legacy built up, and I
Right.
know you kind of alluded to it before talking about POCs and actually getting those things to produce tangible results. So like for these enterprises with a lot of legacy, like what are you suggesting to these type of players? Like what do they do strategically, to kind of get off the ground and get some traction quickly?
Yeah, I think it has to do with a two-pronged strategy, right? One is, um, I believe the CEO needs to make the call. Where does this live? Who owns it? And I don't really have a dog in the fight because I'm not in one of these organizations at the present time, but like it needs to be determined because even last year at Roku, my experience was there was a tremendous amount of, engineering wanted to own it, product need wanted to own it. There was arguments between divisions, right? And there's what I noticed my experience was is it was just very, very slow. There was just not much happening very fast. So one is the CEO needs to step in and say who is actually going to own this, right? And make that decision. And then from there, I think the practitioners and the leaders need to derive the use cases that are going to be, that are going to be in a position that to be the best for these types of automations and artificial intelligence, right? Then it should come up with a use case and you start. And the other piece is that I learned about last year that I think is very can have a lot of negative impact on the strategy here, especially with more established companies, is analysis paralysis is everywhere. Just everybody's just like, you've got to go start somewhere, come up with a use case and start, do something, right? And learn. I would highly recommend you don't do that in a customer facing way, right? Just because of the possibility for inaccurate information and so forth, but just get going, get started.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really timely advice, especially
Yeah.
to those that are kind of tuning in and listening to this. So, switching gears here a little bit, talking more about the specific AI solutions. How are up and coming AI solutions like changing an agent's accent being perceived by enterprises today?
How these things are being perceived is I think this new explosion of AI in the last 18 months or 2 years brings this really interesting situation to the table, which is you can deploy this type of technology to just soften or lighten up a little bit accents as I've learned about, and I think that has a huge amount of value. I think the primary folks that could probably immediately drive value for is the BPO industry, right? That we talked about, because I think as a leader in the BPO industry, you're constantly trying to think about how does my business create amazing market fit for a competitive price, and if you could do that by using the software, I think there's a huge win there. And just ultimately, I think as this improves over time, I was just looking at a thing on LinkedIn yesterday where Reid Hoffman had like his real video and a fake video, or not, sorry, not fake, an AI video. And he was like, hey, look at the difference. So it's like, I think we as a culture and a society are just going to get much more used to this type of technology. It's just going to be kind of second nature. It's not going to be a big deal. So I really think, I really think enterprises are going to be leaning into this.
Kind of another question specifically kind of about the stakeholder management. And I know this is something that, we spent a lot of time talking about previously,
Right.
but how do you actually balance those stakeholder needs, right? C-suite wants one thing, agents want something else. And I'm sure all the folks kind of in the middle of that too, all have different opinions about how this goes. So like, how are you managing that when it comes to bringing AI into the fold here?
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, I think first and foremost, there's got to be a conversation with the C-suite and just a very direct, honest conversation about, yes, we're in a new age, right? We just are with the level of Just the level of amazing. I mean, we're probably all at some level using ChatGPT or a competitor, and have a sense as a consumer what this technology can do. So I think it's important for the leaders that have that seat at the table with the C-suite to go in and be very direct about the fact it's very likely going to be 1 to 2 years before there's any substantial savings while we test and iterate and can maintain our current tech stack, because you can't rip out the current tech stack, put in something new, and then like you have no baseline. So that's one piece. So I think that's how you effectively manage the C-suite. Just be candid and direct, but also show them the potential 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, right? That's also a huge part of that conversation. You can't just say, hey, we're not going to save anything and leave, right? You got to show them the potential that what this technology can do. And as I said earlier, as it comes to agents, bringing them along for the journey, and make it clear for them that the goal is not to replace them full stop. The goal is actually to create more interesting and unique types of workflows that they get to work on, ultimately improving and enhancing their skill set, and making them just more being able to like demand more in the marketplace as it relates to compensation, right? Like that's a big part of it. And then frankly, Chad, I know this probably sounds crazy, but I think those people like the roles I've been in over my career, those folks are in the hardest spot, right? Because they have it kind of coming from both the below and above, and it's just going to take, I think, building a strategic vision, feeling really confident, I think, and fleshing it out, right? Talking to other leaders about it, talking to people about what they've done that's worked well and what hasn't, like obviously being deliberate, and then sticking to your strategy and going to deploy it, right? And then pivoting as the market moves and as major changes happen with technology, pivot, right? That's really all you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a reoccurring conversation point that comes up often, but especially as we get into AI solutions, build versus buy versus hybrid solutions. Let's say that you're not an incumbent technology company like a hyperscaler like Amazon or Microsoft that can build their own stuff internally. Like you are a enterprise facing brand. Like, what do you do? Obviously, there's some nuance there, but from your experience, like what would your suggestion be typically?
I really appreciate that question, because it's been something of a theme in my career, right? Having worked for Amazon and Google, I've been in organizations where they didn't have the technology, especially specifically those two. In both places, they're very different, but you know, Amazon, what I learned pretty early on was they weren't going to buy anything. Like, I mean, I think that's changed over the last 5 or 10 years. They've gotten so big, right? They don't have any choice but to buy like Workday for HR stuff or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they've had to like buy certain technology. But when I was there 12 years ago, like they just didn't buy things. You just dealt with, we scaled at peak 10,000 agents, and we did all that through Erlang C on Excel, right? Until they built an application that solved for it. Google was very much the same, but the scale and the amount of investment available at Google was different. But at Roku, and even a couple of these places, the argument that I've struggled with is, one, having come from a heavy tech background, generally engineers have the most power at the seat of the table, and that's just kind of that's how tech works, and it's fine with that. But my experience is generally engineering leaders they don't want to let something be brought in externally if they don't have to, because it's fun and it's exciting to build. And while they may have the capability to do it, my biggest challenge as a CX practitioner was speed to market, right? So to your main question, yes, Google, Amazon, Meta, these companies are already building all their own LLMs and launching them free or not free or whatever. Like there's not, that's not really even a part of the conversation. But what I would recommend to much smaller organizations that have a niche, right, that are thinking about things like whether it be e-commerce or travel or entertainment or sports betting. I'm just making up some markets that I've been thinking about recently. I highly recommend that unless those folks have, I mean, depending on the size of their business, unless they have 5 to 10 engineers 100% dedicated to this that are not going to be pulled off for other initiatives, which in my experience is next to impossible to guarantee, they should go find the best in the marketplace and go run some trials and play with a couple of different partners, use their networks and their resources to understand who's out there doing this well. And so my recommendation to the non-Googles and Amazons and Metas and Microsofts is find a great partner to buy. That just based on my experience.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic advice. So, as a lot of these companies are adopting AI solutions, like what does that like, in an ideal scenario, what does that roadmap look like, or what does that maturity model look like, right? I know a lot of folks, obviously are starting with call summarization, kind of seems like table stakes,
Right.
the highly commoditized solution, all the way to agent assist and, AI analysis of calls. Like, what would you say is like kind of the ideal roadmap? Let's say that you're working with a company that is a call center and they're starting from scratch as far as like implementing AI, but they have existing call center operations.
Right. Yeah, great question. So I think about this, and I think this is a really important point as well, because I think the vast majority of those out there right now, this is exactly what they're facing, right? Is how do we even get started? First, I would say, as it relates to generative AI, do not launch something to your customers that you don't understand and yet, right? Like I that's first and foremost, right? And I think that's just kind of table stakes. Secondarily, get started with things that are, and it's kind of where the market is right now, I believe, that allow you internal, that allow you to extract, and you mentioned it, kind of summarizing contacts, extract and analyze support data, right? And do that very efficiently and very quickly. Start there. And that also, going back to a prior question, that allows you to think and start working on your plan or strategy as it relates to your data governance, right? Because you're going to find, as you start extracting data and using AI to summarize it and simplify it, to create things like automated voice of the customer reports that product, engineering, marketing, sales, everyone can have access to based on the tools that exist today. That's really where I would think about starting. And the second kind of piece of that is, um, uh, I would think also, as you think about generative, deploy a POC in the contact center with a generative AI bot attached to your CRM, so that the agent, as they're hearing a customer's question, as they're getting a chat or an SMS, they can immediately engage with an LLM that can, which I would also mention, I would limit that LLM to only have access to public facing and or private facing help content, not the entire internet, right? But like have it very dialed in and focused for that, and just see the efficiencies that you can gain with your human agents, right? Like how quickly that was one of the tests I was trying to get off the ground late last year at Roku. Like how much AHT can we take off of a billing call, right? If we just give them access not to search a knowledge center, but to actually put the question into a large language model that spits out the answer almost in real time, in milliseconds, right? I think that's where you start. And then from there, you got to build your strategy. Like, how do you deploy it? Do you deploy it as a part of the product as it grows? That's something I would recommend, right? Where in the product does it make sense to use this technology to simplify and lower the North Star for me is simplifying customer experience and lowering their effort. Lowering a customer's effort has proven, especially in the last 10 years, to drive significantly higher loyalty. And that's, at the end of the day, all we're looking for is to create a simple experience, low effort experience that brings a customer back to transact with us again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's all great advice. A lot of people are probably thinking these things. So it's very timely, very timely. So on that note, Mark, certainly appreciate your time and thank you for sharing all your insights. Would love to have you back on in the future and just kind of track what you do next. Thank you so
That sounds,
much.
yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Chad. I really appreciated the time.